At 2 in the morning, somewhere above the Kuban bridgehead in the spring of 1943, a German searchlight crew heard nothing. No engine drone, no propeller hum, just the faint whisper of wind passing over canvas wings, like a broomstick sweeping across a wooden floor. By the time the first bomb hit, the plane was already gone, swallowed back into the dark. The Germans had a name for whatever was up there. They called them Nachthexen, night witches, and they were terrified of women they could not see. The women who became night witches did not come from a military tradition. Most of them were students, mathematics majors, engineering students, a few school teachers, some factory workers. They were 19, 20, 21 years old. Some had learned to fly at civilian aviation clubs, the Osoaviakim network that dotted Soviet cities in the 1930s. They could handle a cockpit, but they had never seen combat. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, the scale of the catastrophe was beyond anything the Kremlin had imagined. Millions of soldiers were killed or captured in weeks. The Red Army was hemorrhaging manpower. And so, in October 1941, something unprecedented happened. Marina Raskova, a famous Soviet aviatrix who had set distance records before the war, personally petitioned Stalin to form all-female aviation regiments. Stalin agreed. 3 regiments were authorized. One of them, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, would be composed entirely of women, pilots, navigators, mechanics, armorers, even the commanding officer. Every single role. Major Yevdokia Bershanskia, a calm and experienced pilot from the Caucasus, was given command. She was 30 years old, which made her practically ancient among her recruits. The women were issued men's uniforms several sizes too large. Their boots were stuffed with newspaper to fit. They cut each other's hair short and were told to report to Engels, a town on the Volga, for training. They had a few months to learn how to fly at night, navigate by stars, and drop bombs with accuracy, in aircraft that were already obsolete before the war even started. The plane assigned to the 588th was the Polikarpov P-2. Designed in 1928 as a crop duster and training aircraft, it was made of plywood and canvas. It had an open cockpit. Its maximum speed was about 90 miles per hour, slower than most cars on a modern highway, slower than the stall speed of a German Messerschmitt. Carried no radar, no radio, no guns, and no parachutes. The reasoning behind the lack of parachutes was blunt. The planes flew so low that a parachute would not have time to open. Each P-2 could carry 2 small bombs under its lower wings, roughly 300 kilograms total. That was less than a single bomb dropped by a heavy bomber. To cause real damage, the regiment would have to fly multiple sorties per night. And that is exactly what they did. The tactical method was deceptively simple. 3 planes would approach the target together. The first 2 would deliberately attract searchlights and anti-aircraft fire, splitting apart to divide the Germans' attention. While the flak gunners were busy tracking the decoys, the third plane would cut its engine. In the sudden silence, it would glide over the target, just a dark shape against a dark sky, release its bombs, restart the engine, and climb away. Then the 3 would regroup and rotate roles. The plane that had just bombed would become a decoy on the next run. They flew these missions 8, 10, sometimes 18 times in a single night. The mechanics on the ground would reload bombs and patch holes in the canvas by hand, working by feel in the dark because any light would draw German fire to the airfield. A full night of sorties meant a pilot might get 30 minutes of sleep before dawn. The women trained through the Russian winter, learning to navigate by the stars over the frozen Volga steppe. They practiced blind landings in total darkness, cutting their engines at altitude and gliding to the airstrip using nothing but instinct and the faint outline of the horizon. Some of them had fewer than 50 hours of flight time. A few had never flown at night before. The instructors gave them weeks to learn what normally took months, because the front was collapsing and the Red Army needed every aircraft that could carry a bomb. The first combat missions came in June 1942, near the front lines in southern Russia. The women were nervous. Nadezhda Popova, who would become one of the regiment's most decorated pilots, later recalled that her hands were shaking so badly during her first sortie that she could barely hold the control stick. But the bombs fell and she flew back, and by the 3rd mission that same night, the shaking had stopped. It never came back. Through the summer and autumn of 1942, the 588th flew in some of the most brutal theaters of the Eastern Front. The battles for the Caucasus, the defense of Stalingrad's supply lines, the crossing of the Don. The German troops they harassed grew to dread the sound, or rather the absence of sound, that preceded an attack. German soldiers later described the experience in captured letters and interrogation transcripts. One recurring detail stands out: the noise the gliding P-2 made. Without its engine, the biplane's canvas wings and wire struts would vibrate in the airstream, producing a soft, rhythmic swooshing. The Germans said it sounded like a broomstick sweeping. That is how the name was born. Nachthexen, night witches, witches on broomsticks. The psychological effect was enormous. Sleep deprivation became a weapon. German units on the receiving end knew that from midnight to dawn, every few minutes, another silent bomb run could come. They could not rest. They could not predict where the next strike would land. Anti-aircraft crews burned through ammunition firing at shadows. Searchlight operators swept empty sky while a P-2 glided in from the opposite direction. But the cost was real. When a searchlight found a P-2, the plane had almost no chance. Canvas does not stop bullets. The fuel tank was right behind the pilot's seat. If a tracer round hit the plane, it did not just catch fire. The entire aircraft became a torch in seconds. There were no ejection seats, no armor plating. The pilot and navigator either landed the burning wreck or they did not come back. Over the course of the war, the regiment lost 32 aviators killed in action. Many more were wounded and returned to fly again. Yevgenia Rudneva, a navigator and aspiring astronomer who used to identify constellations during missions, was killed in April 1944 when her plane was hit by flak over Kerch. She was 23. She had flown over 600 sorties. Nadezhda Popova was shot down multiple times. Once, after her plane was hit and caught fire, she managed to land in no man's land, pull her wounded navigator from the wreck, and carry her back to Soviet lines on foot through the dark. She went up again the following night. What sustained them was not ideology alone, though many believed in the cause. It was something more immediate, the bond between the women in the regiment. They sang together between sorties. They wrote poetry. They sewed flowers onto their flight helmets. Navigator Larissa Litvinova later said that the regiment felt like a family where everyone understood what you had just been through, because they had been through it too. By the time the war ended in May 1945, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, redesignated the 46th Taman Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment after the battle for the Taman Peninsula, had flown over 23,000 combat sorties. They had dropped approximately 3,000 tons of bombs. 23 of their members had been awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest military honor. Major Bershanskia led the regiment from its first mission to its last. Not a single member was transferred to a male unit. Not a single male officer was ever placed in command. The regiment remained entirely female throughout the war, one of very few units in any military in any war to hold that distinction. After the victory, the regiment was disbanded. The women returned to civilian life. Some finished their university degrees. Some became engineers, teachers, doctors. A few married men from other regiments they had met at airfields between missions. Others carried the war with them in ways that were not visible. The nightmares, the faces of navigators who did not come back, the smell of burning canvas that would surface unexpectedly for the rest of their lives. Nadezhda Popova became an instructor and later a public speaker who spent decades ensuring the regiment's story was not forgotten. She gave interviews, attended commemorations, and corrected historians who got the details wrong. She was insistent on one point above all: the regiment was not a propaganda exercise. They were combat aviators who flew and fought and died alongside every other unit on the Eastern Front. She died in 2013 at the age of 91. One of the last surviving night witches. Many of the women found that the post-war Soviet Union did not know what to do with female combat veterans. Their service was acknowledged officially but often downplayed in public memory. Victory Day parades celebrated tank commanders and infantry heroes. The women who had flown 23,000 sorties in plywood biplanes were politely overlooked. For years, the 588th was a footnote in histories dominated by Stalingrad, Kursk, and Berlin. It took decades and the work of historians like Myles and Raina Pennington for the full scope of what they accomplished to reach a Western audience. In Russia, the regiment's legacy experienced a revival in the 1960s and 70s, when Soviet journalists and filmmakers began interviewing the surviving members. Their testimonies, recorded on crackling tape, translated haltingly, revealed a level of detail and emotional honesty that official histories had scrubbed away. They spoke about fear without shame. They spoke about losing friends without sentimentality. And they spoke, again and again, about the extraordinary fact that they had been allowed to fight at all. Today, a small museum in the town of Engels preserves photographs and personal effects from the regiment's training period. The memoirs of Rakobolskaya and Kravtsova remain one of the most detailed first-person accounts of night combat in any language. In Krasnodar, a memorial plaque marks a building where some of the night witches were billeted during the Kuban campaign. What makes their story endure is not the number of sorties or the tonnage of bombs. It is the image of a 20-year-old mathematics student climbing into an open cockpit at midnight, flying a canvas biplane into searchlights and flak, dropping 2 small bombs, and then turning around to do it again, 8 more times before dawn. No armor, no guns, no parachute. Just skill, nerve, and the silence of a cut engine gliding through the dark. If this story moved you, subscribe to follow the Untold front. New stories every week.